Strange but true stories, tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. The call is coming from inside the house. That line doesn't have the terror that it once did prior to everybody having cell phones. Back when the movie When a Stranger Calls came out in 1979, those words would send shivers down the spines of anybody. But phone calls can still bring a certain amount of terror and confusion, especially when the person on the other end doesn't exist in this world any longer. As fantastic as it seems, the mystery of phone calls from the dead is not an uncommon one. Those who have researched the phenomenon have determined that these calls usually occur within the first 24 hours of the death. But there have been cases in which the calls were received as long as 2 years after. The call is usually filled with heavy static, and the phantom caller's voice is faint, as if far away. Far away, indeed. Following are some remarkable instances of phantom phone calls as told by the people who experience them. In some cases, it's the phantom who answers the phone. But in every case, the experience remains unexplained. Something strange indeed. I come from a really close family. I have 2 older brothers, and we are really close in age, so we have a lot in common, and their friends are my friends. My oldest brother, Jeremy, had a really good friend named Joe. Joe was always hanging around our house, and he had this big personality and a distinctive voice. You always knew when Joe was around. But Joe got sick, and his health went downhill fast. He died soon after he got sick, and we were all devastated. He was young and vibrant just a short time before, and now he was gone. Joe's death obviously affected Jeremy a lot. My brother Matt and I were also deeply saddened, and we just went through the motions of life for a while. A few weeks after Joe died, the phone rang, and Matt answered. Hello? After a few moments, the voice on the other end said,
"Hey Matt, it's Joe. Is Jeremy home? Something really strange seems to be going on."
Matt freaked out. It didn't just sound like Joe. It was Joe. Matt couldn't really think of what to say, so he just said shakily, "No, he's not. I'm sorry." The phone line went dead, and Matt looked at the caller ID. It read, "Out of area." Yeah, no kidding. Matt thought that surely somebody was playing a sick joke. So he hit star 69, which he did back in the waning days of the landline, to find out the number of the last call and call that person back. He couldn't retrieve the number, and we were all left dumbfounded. None of us ever received another call from Joe. To this day, we really have no explanation. Matt is convinced it was Joe's distinctive voice, and it still unnerves him to think about that call. Say goodbye, Grandpa. My husband lost his grandfather a long time ago, but just recently he has been experiencing something really weird. He has seen his grandfather's name on our caller ID, so we thought someone was calling from his grandfather's house. After that first call, we called back immediately, but no one was home. Just today, for the second time, he was at work and clearly, along with coworkers, heard the phone ring. He answered it on the first ring, but only heard a dial tone. When he looked at the phone's directory, which has no caller ID but lists who he has called, he saw his grandfather's name again. What could this mean? How could it be happening? Money is useless here. One of my clients related this story to me a few years ago. At the time, she worked for the Department of Social Services, and one of the services she offered was to provide checks for emergency expenses. She had issued a check for $100 to one of her clients for utilities and was about to close the file when her phone rang. On the line was the woman to whom the check was issued. The woman sounded vague and distracted, but clearly said,
I won't be needing that $100 after all.
My client made a note of it and went on with her other work. That evening at home, she was reading the newspaper when she saw the obituary of the woman she had talked with on the phone that day. The woman had died the day before. Unmistakable mother's voice. 3 years ago, my mother passed away. We were very close, and I miss her daily. Last Christmas, I went to bed and woke up to the phone ringing. I answered it, and a voice that was very familiar to me said,
Hello there.
It was my mother's voice. The line had a static noise, and the sound cut in and out. I said, Mom? This can't be you, Mom. You're dead. She said,
Oh, come on now.
She sounded a bit agitated, and then we were cut off. My 16-year-old daughter was sleeping in the next room and also heard the phone ring that night. I know it was my mother's voice. She has a Norwegian accent. It was her. Was it my brother? About 3 nights ago, my husband got a phone call about 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember it was a very stormy night. He answered and the phone was giving him little bleeps, but nobody was saying anything. Then the phone went dead. I was asleep by the phone, but I never heard it ring, and I always hear the phone ring. Only he heard it. He called the number back on the caller ID, and it said,
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.
The number is still on our caller ID. That same night, around 4 in the morning, his mother, who lives about an hour away, also got a phone call. Her son, who was asleep in the house, also never heard the phone ring. She heard the same bleeps, and it was the same caller ID. She called it back,
We're sorry, the number you have dialed.
and it was also a number not in service any longer. About 5 that morning, his mother was lying in her bed, and she saw a man standing at the foot of her bed looking at her. She said he was tall and thin, had dark eyes and dark clothes. He stared at her for a minute, and then darted across the room and disappeared. We were all freaked out about this, and cannot figure out why this happened all on the same night, and nothing like this had happened before or since. Why was it I did not hear the phone ring, and yet my husband did? Sure, there's probably a logical explanation for why we all received a phone call that night, and for the technical malfunctions of the phone call. But one thing we kept thinking about was about my husband's brother, who had died tragically just 6 months prior. Was he trying to contact us? To let us know that he was okay? Or just to hear the voice of his loved ones one last time? Intercepted call. I just found out that one of my phone calls the other day was a dead lady. I was at my mom's house and I was calling a friend who lived nearby. She was at her cousin's house, so I looked up the number in the phone book. It was the only one by that name in the phone book, so I knew it was my friend's cousin's number. I called it, and it didn't even ring. But an old lady answered. She said,
Hello?
I asked, Is Amelia there? Amelia is my friend Jessica's cousin. The old lady said,
No, dear. Amelia isn't here, sweetie. I should be expecting her any minute now.
So I thought nothing of it and hung up. I thought they left for a bit. I knew Amelia lived with her mom at her grandparents' house. What I didn't know is what I found out when I talked to Jessica. I told Jessica about it, and she said, Amelia's grandma is dead. And we were there all day long. We were sitting right by the phone. It never rang. Who answered the phone? I was staying at a cottage in North Wales in 1997. The cottage was owned by my best friend's grandfather and was in a fairly isolated location, but not too far off the main road. It was very basic, but it had electricity and a boiler for hot water, although no central heating. It was a 3 double-bedroom property with no outhouses. There were 6 of us staying in this cottage one Easter weekend, and we spent much of our time lazing around and visiting local sites of interest. We decided one Saturday morning to go out to the local market and then stop at a pub on the way back. While sitting at the pub eating our lunch, other friends of ours who were staying in a nearby town entered the pub and sat at our table saying they were glad that we were still here and they hadn't missed us. When asked how on earth they knew where we were, they said they had phoned the cottage where we were staying, and the lady who answered the phone told them. There was no one else staying at the cottage. There was no cleaner or any other person tied to the cottage. I spent the remainder of our time there sleeping with the hall lights on, and haven't gone back since. Long distance plan. I have never been a believer in ghosts, but what happened to me, I can't help but reconsider my position. I'm a telephone sales representative, and at the time of this occurrence, I was marketing a phone service. Here is what happened to me at work. On Thursday, April 26th, I made a sales call to Pennsylvania. It started just like any other call. Hi, I need to speak to Mr. or Mrs. B, please.
I'm Mrs. B.
And I continued on with a normal sales call. She seemed very interested and asked a lot of questions. But when I came to the decision-making part, she quickly stopped me.
Oh, I'm sorry, dear, but you're going to have to speak to my husband about this. I have tried to get him to switch so many times, but he won't listen to me. He is married to AT&T and simply refuses to make any changes.
She also quickly pointed out that since his retirement, he spent a great deal of time fishing and was not easy to get in touch with, and it would be best to try early in the morning before he left for his favorite hobby.
But listen, our phone bill has gone up recently because he is making so many calls to North Carolina. He may listen to you if you show him how beneficial it would be.
On that note, I decided that perhaps this was worth a call back and told her that I would call her husband the next day. The next day, I made that phone call, and I probably will never forget it. On the callback, the husband did answer the phone. I introduced myself in the normal fashion and explained that I had been talking to his wife the previous day, and she had suggested that I speak to him. You can imagine the shock and horror when he sadly said to me,
Sir, I don't know who you were talking to, but it wasn't my wife. She has been dead for nearly 2 weeks now, and I'm sorry, but I'm not in any mood to talk to anybody at this time.
With that, he quickly hung up the phone. This has been another strange but true stories. Have you ever experienced a call from the other side? Or maybe something that you can't quite explain? We would love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Your story may just end up on this channel. Let us know what you thought of these stories in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. We appreciate those who have. I'm Steve White. Thanks for watching. Until next time.
The number you've called is disconnected.
Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. What defines death? Or maybe the better question is, when is dead dead? That may sound like an easily answered question, but death has been determined in a variety of ways through human history. In the 1800s and before, if heart and lung function were not detected, the person was deemed to have passed on. Yet there were many cases of very sick or catatonic people being buried alive. Later in the 20th century, the cessation of brain activity was viewed as the end of life. Yet the heart and lungs could be pumped to keep the brain-dead person technically alive. And then there was the debate in 2002 about cerebral death versus whole brain death. By whatever definition science can apply, the people in the following stories were certifiably dead. But yet, according to the people who sent in these stories, each found a way to reach from beyond the grave to deliver a message. The following 3 stories were submitted to us at strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. When my mother was a little girl growing up in Maryland, she was very close to her grandmother. That's not incredibly unusual. Many children are very fond of their grandparents and spend a lot of time with them. But by the way my mother talked about her memories of her grandmother, it was very evident they were incredibly close. When she was 8, she spent every weekend with her grandmother, going shopping on Saturdays that always seemed to include a special lunch spot, and then playing bingo on Saturday nights at the local firehouse. Sunday was for church, and then a stop at her favorite bakery on the way home. My mother mentioned how the two of them talked for hours and hours. She taught my mother about kindness and about the family history. Through my mom's adolescent years, from 1968 through 1975, they spent a lot of time together, and my mother became who she is today, a sweet and gentle and kind person because of her grandmother. In 1980, 10 years before I was born, my great-grandmother died of kidney failure. It was very difficult on the whole family, but in particular on my mother. Years went by, and while the pain of her passing drifted away, the memories never faded. In 1985, 5 years after her grandmother passed away, my mom and dad were living in Laurel, Maryland, about 45 minutes away from Silver Spring, where my great-grandmother had lived. One day, my mom and dad had a horrible argument. It was very heated, and it became physical. My mother told me many years later how devastated that altercation had left her. She remembered that she was crying hysterically a short while after the yelling had stopped when the phone rang. She composed herself enough to answer it and said, "Hello?" She heard static on the line and repeated, "Hello?" Still nothing other than static. Before she hung up, she said one more time, "Hello?" That is when she heard her grandmother's distinctive voice ask, "Are you all right?" Her grandmother's voice had been recognizably deep and raspy when she was still living. There was no question in my mother's mind that this was her grandmother's voice. After all the thousands of hours they had spent together, there was not a bit of doubt. But before my mother could get over her stunned silence and ask her anything, the static rose and the call disconnected. After that brief call, my mother says she was reassured and always knew that the lady she calls Little Gra is never far away and always watching over us. Back in 2002, I was living in I guess you could call it a creepy house. A lot of paranormal stuff seemed to happen while I lived there. I even did an interview with paranormal investigator Brad Steiger, and Brad said there were parts of my story that gave him goosebumps. For this story, you need to know that my mother died about a year prior to this event. I was taking a shower, getting ready to go with my sister to Indianapolis later that day. I turned off the water, and I heard the answering machine beep and the tape rewind. I thought it was my sister calling to see if I was ready to go yet. I wrapped a towel around me and walked into my bedroom where my old landline phone was located. I noticed that the light was blinking really fast. That was odd. It was flashing a lot faster than it normally did. It was usually a slow blinking pale red light to let you know you had a message waiting. Oh well, nothing to be concerned about. I pushed the playback button and started to walk away. I took 2 steps and froze dead in my tracks. My mom's voice was coming from the answering machine. My mother, who had been dead for about a year, was speaking to me. She said, "Darlene? Darlene? Pick up the phone, Darlene. Pick up the phone. I know you are there." And then I heard soft laughter, which did not sound like my mom's laugh at all. It wasn't evil laughter. but I knew it wasn't my mom's. Chills ran down my spine as I listened to that voice. My mom's voice, coming out of the machine and filling the room. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My eyes watered as fear gripped me. I looked at the caller ID, but nothing came up. I picked up the phone and called my sister to tell her what had just happened. She didn't believe me, so I decided to let her hear it herself. I rewound the tape to play it back for her, but when I did, there was nothing but static. I tried to rationalize it for a long time after that. Maybe it was an old message, but that wouldn't explain the laughter at the end. And why was there only static? I had used this answering machine for many years. If it was a mind trick, or I heard something that wasn't there, somebody else's message should have been on playback. There were several other occurrences that happened at this house in the nearly 12 years me and my family lived there. After hearing my story, the paranormal investigator Brad Steiger thought that my house may be sitting in a vortex to the spirit world. Whatever it was that happened that day, it was incredibly creepy. My name is Jennifer. Back in 2012, my first love and high school sweetheart Tony and I separated after 20 years together. We had been married for 7 years and had 2 kids. Even though I knew it was for the best, I was devastated. I do not do well with change. I wallowed in self-pity for a while and was still feeling a bit uneasy about the whole situation when Tony and I planned to meet for dinner to talk about sharing custody of the children. I was actually looking forward to this meal together. He had our children that night but had gotten a sitter. Then, about 10 minutes before we were supposed to meet, he called to cancel. All dressed up with nowhere to go, I decided to not waste a night out, so I called some friends to go get a margarita. Each friend I called already had plans and declined. I was upset, but I decided to go to my local pub alone. After all, it had been months since I had gone out, and it was affecting me. My favorite local band was playing at my local pub, and so I decided to go see them and lift my spirits. After a few minutes, I stepped out for a cigarette, and I ran into Dwight, a guy I had gone to high school with, and we had worked together at a local grocery store. Dwight was a funny guy and charming too. We talked for a little while, and he asked how Tony was doing. I explained what had happened. He talked about his divorce and his kids, and we seemed to click. We talked a little bit longer, rekindled our friendship, and then, after a short while, we started dating. We did everything together: fishing, hunting, camping, hiking. Unlike with Tony, we did everything together and had so much in common. He became my best friend and my love. We both had our kids on the same scheduled days, and then with our exes on the other days. We had the perfect balance of family time and alone time. We fell in love fast. A year later, I moved in with him on his family farm, and every day was an adventure. He purchased a dirt bike. He loved riding that thing. He wasn't a daredevil or Evel Knievel. He wore all the protective gear, but he loved showing off that bike to his friends. He built a track and invited everyone he knew to come and ride. Then came Saturday, June 28th, 2014. I got up and was about to get ready for work as I normally did. Dwight didn't have to work that day, and he went out with 3 friends to ride. It was a hot summer day, and he was excited to ride. My father was returning from a long trip the following day, and I wanted to stop and check his house, grab the mail, and get the house ready for Dad to return. I decided to leave the farm and instead go to my father's house to get ready. I figured it would save time, and then I would head into work. I got to Dad's. Animals were good. I brought the mail in and took the trash out. I got in the shower. As I got out of the shower, I heard my cell phone ringing. It was my ex-husband, Tony. He told me he was on his way to get me. Dwight had gotten into a dirt bike accident. He told me Dwight and his friend collided on the track. I wanted to know how he knew all this. Was this a sick joke? He explained that Dwight was riding with one of his friends. When the accident happened, This guy didn't have my number, so he called Tony instead. My world flipped upside down. Tony rushed me to the hospital, and I raced into the ER. I watched as they worked on Dwight. They did their best, but I watched life leave Dwight's body. I was inconsolable. Dwight, my best friend, was gone from this world, just like that. I tried to be strong, but I couldn't stop crying. A few weeks passed. My kids were at Tony's house. I was home alone, wanting nothing more than to just see Dwight again, to hear his voice. So I watched videos we took while hiking and camping and four-wheeling. I fell apart crying on my bed. A video of us on my phone was playing, and that's when I heard, Jennifer, I'm right here. Stop crying for me. Get some sleep. I'm right here, all right? I'm right here. I froze. I thought I had lost it, thought I was cracking up, hearing what I wanted to hear. I rewound the video on my phone. It was a simple video I had shot about 2 weeks before he died, of him and me on the four-wheeler. I was holding my phone and recording us talking and laughing. In the video, I hop off the bike and Dwight rides away from me. In the noise of the four-wheeler pulling away, I could hear that message in Dwight's whispered voice. Jennifer, I'm right here. Stop crying for me. Get some sleep. I'm right here, all right? I'm right here. I played it back over and over. I felt so at peace hearing his voice and those words. I called Tony to come over so we could talk. I had to know what I was hearing could be heard by somebody else. I knew that he would be 100% honest with me. I explained how upset I was, that all I wished was to know Dwight was okay, but wondered if I was forcing the words I wanted to hear. I played the video for him twice. Tony was never a big believer in paranormal things, and certainly not life after death. He flipped out, grabbing his hair, pacing back and forth, almost yelling, but he kept saying, "Oh my God, Jennifer, it really is Dwight." Well, that was the only proof I needed from my biggest skeptic. That it wasn't me, or my imagination, or simple desperation. It was Dwight letting me know he was okay, which is all I had been praying about. I thank you for your amazing stories, and because of you, I was finally comfortable enough to share my story. You are welcome, Jennifer, and I'm glad you were able to find comfort. We appreciate you and the other 2 subscribers of Strange But True Stories sending us these amazing accounts. If you have a story you would like to tell us, maybe it's something that happened that you've only told your best friend in the strictest of confidence, we would love to hear it. No guarantees, not all emails that we get make it into an episode, but if it helps you to put it out there, send it to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Tell us what you thought of this episode in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and sign up for notifications so you know when a new episode of SBT drops on YouTube. Thanks for watching this video. I'm Steve White. Until next time.